There are not going to be many newspapers left in 10 years. There are not going to be many books left in 10 years. There are not going to be many post offices left in 10 years. There probably won't be any paper checks left in 10 years. And when you buy a computer later on in this decade, there isn't going to be much room for storage because it's all going to be on the cloud. Now, these are all things you know. Newspapers are failing right and left. Even a paper as big as the New York Times is in financial problems because younger people are getting all their news on the internet. Books, raise your hand if you own a Kindle or read books on an iPad. I rest my case. My wife is never without her iPad. In fact, well, actually, she uses a Kindle. But I'll make this comment. How many of you are using an iPad in your businesses right now? Raise your hand. Wow, you're ahead of the curve. But in, I'll say 3 years, if I were here and asked you to raise your hand, 100% of you would raise your hand. Stephen Jobs never imagined, frankly, the applications in business the iPad will have. But I'll tell you something about the cloud. Raise your hand if you really think you understand cloud computer storage. A few. Okay. Well, there is no cloud. The whole concept of the cloud was actually an emblem that was developed by Microsoft long, long ago in their computer business. And it turned out to be kind of an interesting, I don't know, vision of computer information that we will all have somewhere out there. Well, I'd like to tell you where somewhere out there is. By and large, somewhere out there is a cinder block building in North Dakota. Actually, hundreds of cinder block buildings in North, South Dakota, Washington, Oregon, some in Montana. Somebody thinks they know why the cloud is in cinder block buildings containing gigantic servers with all your storage on them is in the Dakotas and Washington and Montana. Yell it out if you think you know why. Cheap electricity, that's a good answer. Anything else?
Lots of space.
Lots of space, that's a good one. I asked my wife the question yesterday. She came up with these two. One more.
Low seismic potential.
Climate. Climate's the major reason. It's cold up there, and boy, those computers put out a heck of a lot of heat. So their costs of cooling them, and you're aware they need to be cooled, is less. I've been to many of them. They have you don't want to work there. They have no windows. But anyway, these are things that are happening for sure. Of things that you're probably less aware of are the following. High-speed rail will never happen. Incredibly expensive. They're building one in California that will be a big failure. You know they built one in China. They've had problems. They have them in Europe in very dense populations. They're kind of okay, but they all have problems. There will be no successful high-speed rail in the United States. There will be electric cars in America in 10 years, about the same number there are now. It is physically impossible to build battery storage that is light enough that we can get the mileage that we need. So electric cars are a niche. They're cute. They say something about yourself. I mean, the reason the Prius sells, which is a combination, a hybrid of electric and gasoline, is not because people really think it's great for the environment. Certainly not because they think they're going to save money on it. The Prius makes a statement to your friends. I care about the environment. And that's about where the electric car is going to continue. You're not going to see more than a tiny niche because economically they simply don't work. We're seeing wind all over the country. We will never see wind power as a significant part of our electric grid. The same goes for solar. They are too dispersed. To harvest the wind and solar requires too much land and too much equipment. And they require 100% rolling backup because the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow, and we can't let the electric grid go down. So we have to have a gas or coal-fired power plant standing at the ready, actually operating, so that you can put it in. So eventually, when the government stops funding and supporting 55 cents on the dollar to these supposedly renewable and clean energies, they will go away. I think most of you, I know I will be around in 10 years, and I will travel around the country, and I will see all the monuments to wind, which will be wind turbines standing idle, all of the United States, because when they stop supporting it, there just won't be money around to maintain them, and they break down fairly rapidly. We'll still have biofuels. We'll have ethanol and biodiesel. They will never be a significant percentage of our automotive fuel, but they'll be around because the military forced a bill through the Congress a few years ago requiring that by 2022 we produce 36 billion gallons of biofuels in order that in the worst case scenario they would have enough fuel for their tanks and ships and airplanes. So that it'll be around, but it'll never be particularly significant. There's something you really need to understand about all things that are supported by government subsidies. They really can't ever work. They really can't ever be useful, because if they were, private industry and entrepreneurship would have developed them long ago. We've had windmills for a century. We've had solar power in some form or other for nearly a century. And people have tried to develop it, and it never worked. So they got the government to subsidize it, and they make a lot of money on these subsidies. When the printing presses stop, they're gone. The greatest contributor technologically to our society in the 20th century was Thomas Edison, who created, in a sense, electricity, and electric power, and 1,000 other inventions. We never had any government subsidies. The greatest contributor technologically to society in this century is Stephen Jobs. He never had any government subsidies to develop all his things. You name them all. We just talked about the iPad. So be very skeptical about every major government program. Global warming drives a lot of them. The concept of man-caused global warming, that man controls the temperature of the planet, when in fact our contribution to the greenhouse gas envelope over the planet is just slightly over 0.1% of the total greenhouse envelope that makes our life livable. And yet the government puts $5 billion in the coffers of academics to fund research to show that man controls the climate. That will die in 3, 5, 7, or 8 years. It's dying now, but it's going a very slow death. It's one of my favorite topics, and out on the tables outside this room, there are enough of my business cards for all of you in case I'm exciting enough in the remainder of my time that you'll want to contact me and ask me questions, and I hope you will. But on the back of it are my 10 favorite reasons why man-caused global warming is in fact the biggest scam ever perpetrated on society. I'm going to be talking a lot about economics, and you'll also find on the table a monthly publication that I create or help to create called Budget and Tax News, that will deal with all the specifics of the problems in the American economy that face the tile floor covering industry. Water is probably the only issue in the future that is not totally exaggerated as a problem. It is our dearest natural resource. It will always be short. There will never be an overwhelming abundance. There will also never be a crisis, because man is capable of solving all its water problems and has been able to do that for the last 2,000 years without any conflict at all. Life expectancy. We're living longer. I'm 75 years old. I'm planning to live to 114. The reason for that is I'm really not, I don't think I'm special. And virtually nobody is living past 114. There are currently 65 registered 114-year-olds in the world, and I kind of feel sorry for them all because they're all dropping over at 114 and a half. So I figure I'm no better than them, so I'm only aiming for 114. But the reality is, right now the life expectancy is in the 80 area. It is going to creep up with from tremendous medical advances and people taking a little better care of themselves. But the top level of human existence is 120 years. And we know that fairly firmly. And the reason is that virtually every animal on the earth, their potential life expectancy is 6 times their maturation age. We fully mature by the age of 20, by times 6. 120 is your best hope, and I hope someone here in this audience manages to go that far. But on the medical side, don't expect any medical miracles in your lifetime. Medical advances have been tremendous. I wouldn't put them in the category of miracles. Ever since we discovered the DNA molecule and understood the formula for life and understood the genes that essentially control every trait we have and every illness that we have, we've made improvements in human health, but we haven't found the cures for major illnesses and eliminated them. And the best example of this is that 25 years ago, we found the gene that causes cystic fibrosis. And yet we cannot today eliminate cystic fibrosis. So even understanding the cause of things does not necessarily lead to the solution of it. A couple more things on energy before I get into the areas that are of greater importance to you. Nuclear energy, and Eric mentioned that my latest book is the Encyclopedia of Nuclear Energy, will run the world in 100 to 200 years. Right now, we get 20% of our energy from nuclear. France gets 80, Japan 50. The problem in Japan, which was not a nuclear problem, obviously an earthquake and a tsunami, has created fear, unwarranted fear, because people think nuclear power plants are tantamount to a nuclear bomb. A nuclear power plant cannot explode. It cannot become an atomic bomb. That's an hour lecture I won't give you right now. But nuclear power has been set back somewhat, where they're moving forward still in many countries, including China. But eventually, it's an inexhaustible supply of fuel that will run the world certainly two centuries from now. In the meantime, however, what's going to really shock you is that we don't really need it and won't need it at all for a century or more. And what you're going to learn in the coming years, if you're not getting an inkling of it now, is that the United States is the richest energy country in the world. I mean, we dwarf Saudi Arabia. We have more natural gas, and you're all reading about the shale gas and the fracking and so on. We've developed a system that we used in the oil industry 60 years ago that has now unlocked resources in natural gas that dwarf any other energy on any country in the world. We've always been the leader in coal, and that people don't think we can build a clean coal-fired plant is absurd. I mean, believe me, it isn't rocket science, but the government is making it difficult to build coal plants. We have more oil than Saudi Arabia if we're allowed to develop it. The biggest oil field in the world operating today is in North Dakota. It isn't yet considered the biggest oil field in the world, but it will in the coming years as they really plot the whole thing called the Bakken field. If we're allowed to drill offshore, if the government allows us to develop our resources on government land, the government owns most of the land in the country, there's no question we could be energy independent. If not, all we need is to bring it in from Canada and Mexico, which are our biggest sources in any case, but might be a source of pride and good feeling, and you'll recognize it in the next few years that we are the richest in energy. Perhaps of greater now impact on your business are some of the world features of what's going on. We're all reading daily about what is going on in Europe. We're beginning to realize, and it's been written and said by others, that the Eurozone might not have been a great idea. If you were to analyze each of the 17 countries in the European Union, you will find, with few exceptions, their economies have not benefited by a centralized economic government in the Eurozone. Having one currency has not been successful. Will it break up? I doubt it. There is so much invested in the Eurozone and the Euro that I suspect it will survive regardless of what it's going through now. But everybody in this room, including some of you who live in the Eurozone, are aware of the difficulties. And the difficulties are brought on by an entitlement society. Italy, which caused a near 400-point drop in the stock market yesterday, is now recognized to have far more debt than Greece. In Italy, they get 42 paid days of vacation a year. That's a little much. We're going to prosper. I'm going to go in a moment in this country because we have a whole different can-do entrepreneurial attitude than exists in Europe. That is going to have to change. I am confident that things will be solved in Europe very, very painfully. The two most exciting things that have happened this week in Europe is that George Papandreou has resigned from the leadership of Greece, and Mr. Berlusconi has agreed to resign from the leadership in Italy. Not so much that they are bad people. It's that they no longer have the confidence of their citizens. And the biggest problem in the world today economically is the lack of confidence in their government, lack of confidence in their economy. We can prove it easily here in the United States. There are normally $4 trillion of cash floating around in our economy in the United States. Today there's $8 trillion of cash. Some of it is hurting you. It's held by banks that won't loan small businesses money. It's a numerical indicator of the lack of confidence. Well, Berlusconi and Papandreou stepping down gives people a feeling that we can start anew, get some people in charge that will set us on a path to solving our problems, and I think that is an optimistic note. There is fashionable chatter all over this nation that the U.S. is going downhill, that we're not going to be the number one country, that we're going to be a second-rate country. It is not true. It never will be true. We are the strongest country. We will remain that way. We have economic problems. I guess the best I can say is that we're the best of the worst of all the European countries with their debt problems. But we will not give up our number one place. We control the seas. We have a navy 5 times larger than any other country. But what we have is what you have in this room, entrepreneurial spirit. This country was founded on entrepreneurial spirit and freedom. We will not be turned aside. We have problems. They're solvable problems. China will not overcome us. They are a competitor to be respected. They are also a tremendous source of buying our products and selling buying products from them that are cheaper than we can make them and selling them an awful lot of things. So they are a competitor. They're also a trading partner. They are very good at rattling sabers and making people think they're going to be better than us. 2 wonderful examples that you may be familiar with is about 2 months ago, there was a picture all over the internet of a stealth bomber China had built. A month ago, there was a picture of a new aircraft carrier China was building, all over the internet and on the front page of newspapers. I know a lot about China. I have traveled in China, and I can tell you exactly how many aircraft carriers and how many stealth bombers they own. Someone want to guess?
0.
No, they own the one that they showed in the picture. They are the master at public relations. They have a lot of windmills in China. They're primarily a coal-fired and nuclear-fired country, but they have a big windmill industry to make it look like they're green, but mostly they provide most of the wind turbine blades for the United States. They talk about green jobs. For every green job created in this country, we lose 2 other jobs in standard industry because of the increased electricity. And most of the jobs that we create in the wind turbine industry are, in fact, in China. We are number one, and we are most assuredly going to stay number one. And it's because of the spirit that you have in this industry.